right. So thanks for jumping on in. This is episode 2 of our limited series podcast on startup marketing tips, getting a good idea of how to brand your practice for success. So when we talk about the difference between startup or an acquisition, I know for a lot of startups, they end up going through the process because they couldn't find a practice to purchase that made sense to them. This is definitely becoming a bigger issue. I know in a lot of the markets that I work with clients in, the DSOs are coming in, they're paying over 100% of collections. They're getting those practices that are desirable, that are over $1 million. And those are the ones you want, right? And they're in desirable areas too. So even if you could find a bank that would loan to you in that scenario, it still has a negative effect on truly what you can afford to grow the practice, whether that's through marketing, optimizing the teams that you're getting, renovations, new technology, that type of thing. So let me do this. Let's take a step back, and I want to kind of go through the pros and cons if you were to acquire a practice. And then we'll go through obviously that with a startup. So the first thing is when you're buying a practice, we call this practice acquisition. You're taking over somebody else's team, right? Hopefully that dentist stays for a little bit, maybe not. But right now in the climate we're in, you may have to overpay to get what you want, like we talked about before. Or you may just get outspent to the DSOs. Second, like I'm saying, you're taking over someone else's team. You're adopting a team and they're already in place. And a lot of times I see that they've all been together for 20, 30 years. So it's kind of like you're an outsider in your own practice. And so it's your first time kind of owning a practice and it's like, oof, now I, have to figure out exactly how things work here. And, now my vision's a little bit derailed because I've got to work through the team first. So the current team, they may view growth, I've seen this before, in a negative way because they look at it as, okay, new patients, that's going to be uncomfortable for us. We've been used to the same patients coming in year after year. They look at it as working harder and basically having to change the way they're currently doing things. People don't love that, right? So the other part of this, when you want to go modernize that practice, it can be very expensive. Hopefully you've been able to buy the real estate, but if not, you're going to have to go in there and pay to get some renovations to modernize it if you're going to be bringing in, different types of patients and new patients. So I used to say, look, kind of redo the reception area because when people come in, that's what they'll see and that'll give them a good first impression. But that's not really enough anymore. The operatories have to be updated. People have expectations. Most likely you've come from a practice that has a lot of technology if you've worked at a group practice or a DSO. So you're kind of used to that. I understand you don't want to take a step back in a startup, but it's even worse when you've got everything there, but it's not what you really want. Generally, older practices may not have the technology that you're looking for, like I was just saying, and that is going to be an additional cost. But then you also, and this is a bigger deal, you're going to have to train or find the people familiar with it. So that's a whole nother different set of rules, a whole nother kind of ramp up, if you will. I tend to find people doing acquisitions don't necessarily need as much marketing help as they really do leadership help. If you think about it, you've been a technician for all these years, or now you're buying more practices and you're still practicing if that's, building out a group. The biggest thing here is you've got to start not only continuing to do your job as that technician, but you have to start leading people. You've got to have the right processes and systems because if the ones that are already in place you don't love, that could be a problem. So some of these soft skills you may already have and that may be great, but now you're a business owner and those come at a different level. So those are the negatives, but the positives, and these are big. The biggest one is you should have cash flow and you're going to have a patient base to work with. So this is sometimes easier to deal with if you're used to being in a busy practice. It can help alleviate some of that financial stress that startups feel in those first 6 months. I say this, and this I'll talk about it as a con when we get to startups, but a startup, you're flying an empty plane, and that feels weird. So if you've come from a busy practice, it's just not going to be busy. It's just not. But you also might find that when you acquire a practice too, that it's just not where you're used to. So again, I think acquiring a practice makes you feel better because you have patients to work on It keeps your days busy. It helps you concentrate on problems that may arise, and you can start to work through your process and system with that. That's all a great way, as being that dental venturer of getting into ownership. So jumping into pros and cons of doing a startup. So a startup, if done right, I mean, I'm going to tell you what you already know here, right? If done right, you get to decide what the market value is by building out the practice in a responsible and intentional way. So I want to make this kind of point early on. When we're talking about buying a practice, hopefully you can get it where you want it, and then you've got to kind of figure out what you're going to do with it, right? But you're going to pay whatever the market tells you to. In a startup, you get to kind of go slower. You can say, these are the operatories that I'm going to have, plumbed initially. This is what I see. And you can kind of control your costs, and then really making sure you're thinking about the finances as you move forward. Hopefully, you've got a good team around you, advisory team, good financial people that are giving you, hey, here are the milestones. Here's what you can expect through these first few months, few years, and helps you think about that. I know there are great sales reps out there with the supply companies. They are very helpful. Some are great at helping you realize exactly what I just said. You do not need this right now. And some are just a little bit more transactional, and they're going to say, oh no, build it out exactly how you want it. Put all the bells and whistles in it. Get that CEREC machine and that laser and all the different things that make this the forefront technology practice of the future. But when you do that, just remember, you might end up not having money to hire the staff you want or do the marketing you really need to do to start building that practice. Other kind of pros, I would say location becomes less of an issue. I'm not saying that you can be in the exact place you want to, but it's a lot easier to be in the place you want to if you're going to go lease a space and build it out, or hopefully you can buy something depending on where you're at. The other thing you can do is build it out the way you want it, as far as efficiency, aesthetics, what the patient experience is going to be like. Honestly, what the employee experience is going to be like. I would think about that as you're looking down the road. I'll talk a little bit in another episode about your blueprint, but you may build this tiny little staff area, lunch area, cafeteria, whatever it might be, staff lounge. That's what I was trying to think of. And you build it small because you're like, oh, I don't need it because I don't have a lot of staff. But what about down the road when you might have a couple of doctors in there, 4 hygienists, 4 assistants, 3 admins? I mean, that could be a problem. You can also build out the staff that fits you best. I'll talk in later episodes about how to use assessments to define culture and find the people that are going to work best with you. Nothing is worse than when I see startups that have hired people that they don't necessarily mesh well with, and immediately they're starting their culture out on the wrong foot, and they're going home and they're thinking about a staff issue versus how can I get up tomorrow and bring in some more quality new patients or make more connections in my community. So you want to make sure you build out the staff that fits you best. I do believe that is an advantage. Now, here's the thing. It may take you some time, but you can also build out a practice of your ideal patients. We have a lot of clients that what they love about this brand first, market second kind of mentality, and you've got to market, you've got to spend money, don't get me wrong, but they're building out a practice of the patients they want. And nothing's worse in a startup than when you just go out there, get anybody that you can, bring all these people in, and a lot of them are the patients you don't want. Because here's the thing. If you're good, what's the worst thing that could happen? Bad patients refer you, because they're not going to refer you to better people than them. They're going to refer you to people that you probably don't want, more people like the bad patients you just got. So really being able to take your time and build out an ideal patient base is awesome when you've got a startup. And again, I get it. You want to make some money. So there's going to be some marketing. There's going to be some patients you may not want, but we're seeing a lot of activity that really is beneficial in the beginning when you focus on your brand. You also have the opportunity to learn more about operating a business. This is incredibly important. As you're building this out, those first few months where it's just kind of quiet, this is the biggest advantage. And most dentists do not take advantage of it. And as I coach people in these first few months, I'm like, lean into learning how to run the business. You are going from being a technician to being a business owner. If you've already owned several practices and now you're going to be building out one, this is your first, but you've got to be in it and take a look at it and see, how can we build this so that you can build that blueprint for your next one. So take advantage of those first few months. And that's definitely one of the, if not the biggest advantage of a startup. Biggest con, and this is it, right? Is you're just starting without any patience. And I use this analogy of, flying an empty airplane. But nobody knows you yet. You haven't built that brand. You haven't built any value in your brand. You haven't gotten those referrals. You haven't gotten those 6-month recalls. The biggest thing you can do is start to build your brand, let people know who you are, create awareness, make connections, but it is going to be a little bit uncomfortable in the beginning. You're also going to be a new business owner. So that's, taking into consideration the advantage, like I talked about before, of taking those first few months, but that can be scary and it takes a little getting used to. So I'm going to give you some insights in the next episode on how to start building that brand and really get ahead of the game so that you can start to build out that ideal patient base. So looking forward to seeing you in episode 3, where we talk about build your brand now and worry about the marketing later.